Hello, my name is Theresa Lola. I am a poet and I am also currently the Young People's Laureate for London. And I'm here today as part of Cressida Cowell's Creativity Summer Camp. And I'm going to be talking about the power of poetry. So I started writing poetry when I was quite young, and it started off in primary school as diary entries. I would write about my life, my friends, my family. I would write about everything I was observing, whether it was the sky or the trees. I was just so excited about noting things down. And slowly it became poetry. I loved how much creativity I could insert into what I was writing through poetry. And if you're watching today, maybe you already write poetry. Maybe you write every day, maybe you write once in a while, or maybe you're just interested in writing poetry. One thing I'll definitely say is that poetry is powerful. It is a powerful tool, and I'll definitely encourage you to keep writing and to keep reading poetry. And so let's start with, why is poetry powerful? What are the reasons why poetry is powerful? I'm going to give you some of my reasons I think poetry is powerful, and I hope that you agree. So the first is, poetry allows us to tell our personal experience and perspective. Poetry allows us to share our personal experience and perspective. There's so much happening in the world, so much is happening, and a poem allows us to share our own personal experiences, our own personal and individual stories or collective stories. So maybe you could write a poem about riding a bike after a long week, or maybe you could write a poem about something that's going on in the world, like global warming or war, but you could write about it from your personal and individual perspective. That is what's so powerful about poetry, is that in the midst of everything that's going on, you can give your own voice, give your own perspective, and write about your individual or collective stories. So the second reason that I think poetry is powerful is that it allows us to be creative with words. It allows us to be creative with words. I'm not sure if you've how many poems you've read, but there are a lot of poems about friendships, and a lot of poems about school, and a lot of poems about love, and a lot of poems about all these things. But they still impact us every time we read it. And it just shows how with a poem, there are so many different ways to say the same thing. And you can never run out of creative ways to tell our stories. And I think that's fascinating. So maybe today you could write a poem about your family, and you can use like space imagery, spaceship imagery. And maybe next year you could write another poem about family, and you can use video games imagery. That could be quite cool. But then what happens is that you have two poems about family, and they're different because you've played words in different ways. And I think that's very interesting. So I have one more reason I think poetry is powerful. I think poetry is powerful because it allows us to express ourselves. It allows us to express ourselves. There are a lot of things that we experience and thoughts that we have, and it's always good to note them down. I told you that I started off writing poetry as diary entries. It's always good to have a healthy outlet, to write down the things that we are thinking or experiencing. And poetry allows us to connect with our emotions. It allows us to jot these things down in creative ways. And I think that that's powerful. And it allows us to express ourselves, whether happy or sad or funny. All of these things you can do in a poem. So now the question is, how can we write powerful poems? How can we write powerful poems? I'm going to give you some tips about how I think you could write some really powerful poems. The first tip I would say is to add details to your poem. Add details to your poem. Tell us what you can see, what you can feel, what you can taste, what you can hear. So if you're writing a poem about going out on a walk, what do you hear the birds say? What color is the sky? How do you feel? What does the sky taste like? That could be interesting. Add detail, because what that does is that it expands your poem and it makes it rich, and then people can really get the message that you're trying to share. So I'm going to give you a writing task quickly. And the writing task is to pick a place that you think is really cool, that you would love to go to or that you've been to. Pick a place that you think is really cool, that you either have been to or you want to go to. And I want you to describe that place using one of your senses. Describe that place using one of your senses. So I hope you have a pen and paper with you. If you don't, you can pause the video. And so maybe you could pick, I could pick Alton Towers, and I could pick hearing, everything I can hear. So what I would do is I would write my poem about Alton Towers, but I would write everything that I can hear in Alton Towers. So maybe you can write one sentence, you can write a few sentences, but I want you to describe that place that you've either been to or want to go to, but I want you to describe it using one of your senses. And when you read it, you'll find that it just gives so many interesting details. Is that all done? That's good. The second tip I would give for writing powerful poems is to use poetry techniques. Use poetry techniques. Don't worry, I'm not going to quiz you on any poetry techniques, but the one that we are going to look at is alliteration. Alliteration is when you have two words with the same first letter. So cold can, lovely lake are my examples. And so why is alliteration good, or why could it be good to make powerful poems? It's because it puts emphasis on those words. Those words are rhythmic, and it basically gets the reader, the audience, to pay attention to those words, to listen to them. So if there is a line that you want the reader or the audience to know about, then you can definitely use alliteration to bring the attention to it. So I hope you have your pens and papers now, or pencils and papers. I'm going to give you a task. I want you to finish this sentence. The sentence is, I love when the... Now I want you to finish it with an alliteration. So I've put, I love when the car cruises. I want you to give me as many of your own examples of that sentence as possible. And maybe one of those lines or sentences could be something that you really like, and it could go on to be your poem. I hope those tips have been helpful, and I hope that you do agree that poetry is powerful. So I'm going to read you a poem of mine. I did say earlier that I also love writing poetry, so I'm going to share a poem of mine with you. This poem is titled Ode to Your Voice. And an ode poem is a praise poem. So this is a poem for you all the amazing young people that I meet that are writing poetry, that are changing the world with poetry and with their voice. Say, ode to your voice. Your voice is ripe with the glow of youth. It rests like a sky and clings for greater heights. There is no age restriction to wear a crown. When your voice pours itself into a microphone, the world swims out of its cave to listen. Your voice speaks new inventions to life, creates apps, coughs out new ideas, designs solar panels. Your voice bulks up its muscles and pushes wide gaps of inequality closed. Your voice sings protests until they become a chorus. Your voice looks out for those who should be looking out for it. Your voice is selfless. Your voice speaks out about climate change. Your voice holds the earth's hand and guides it, the way one does to a younger sibling in a playground. Your voice runs marathons to raise money for a cause. Your voice isn't always loud, but it whispers and it shakes the trees. Sometimes your voice is shy, but your voice is still valid. Your voice crawls out of every rabbit hole the world tries to shove in it. How it builds a wonderland in the middle of a busy street. Your voice recites a poem and redresses every ugly thing as beautiful. Your voice has "We are the future" plastered on it. Your voice documents the unseen and reminds us of the seen. Your voice will not be forgotten. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching. And don't forget to check out the Children's Laureate website for other awesome creative tips. Thank you.